Financial leadership is changing. CFOs no longer record history. They make history. This podcast will help you become a better leader, strategic thinker, and digital visionary. Welcome to Secrets of Rockstar CFOs, the ultimate podcast for chief financial officers. Follow along as Jack McCullough engages in exciting chats with accomplished CFOs, learning how they overcame obstacles and positioned their companies for the future. Here's your host, Jack McCullough.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. I'm your host, Jack McCullough. You can follow us online at rockstarcfos.com. We have a great guest today, so let's get to it. Rock on. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of Secrets of Rockstar CFOs. I'm your host, Jack McCullough. By day, I'm the president of the CFO Leadership Council, and we have a fantastic guest. Great company. She actually keynoted one of our conferences a couple of years ago, so I've really been looking forward to this one. The guest is Lauren StClair. She's the CFO of NerdWallet. If you watch TV at all, you've seen their commercials a little bit. I'm going to give a brief overview of NerdWallet. It's a personal finance platform offering tools and advice to help users make informed financial decisions. That's as simple as I'm capable of saying it. Lauren, welcome to the Secrets of Rockstar CFOs.
Hi, Jack. Super excited to be here.
Great. I'm glad to hear that. And how did I do on the description? Maybe you can expand upon that a little bit.
Yeah, I think you captured it really well. I'll go into a bit more detail for our listeners, but NerdWallet is really a platform that provides financial guidance to consumers and to small and medium-sized businesses, because our mission is to provide clarity for all of life's financial decisions. And we achieve that by providing consumers and SMBs with trustworthy and knowledgeable financial information so that they can make smart money moves.
That's great. And the company's been very successful. Lauren was the CFO that took them public almost 3 years ago, if I have my facts straight. So it's a wonderful and important company. And we'll talk about that later. But before we do, I want to ask a little about your early years. Where did you grow up, Lauren?
I grew up in Philadelphia.
Oh, wow. Okay. I don't know why I just assumed that you were in Northern California because of where you went to school. But did you have brothers and sisters?
I did. I have one younger sister, and she's in Chicago now. So she and I both moved out of Philadelphia for undergrad and stayed in those areas where we went to school.
Well, I know you love sports. What sports teams do you and your sister root for? Because you're not presently living in some sports-happy towns.
Exactly. While I moved coast, I will always be a diehard Philadelphia fan. So funny enough, my husband works for the Phillies, so we cheer for the Phillies and cheer for the Eagles, pretty much all the Philadelphia sports teams.
Okay, so your sister too, or did she get taken by the Chicago Cubs?
I think she would still claim loyalty to Philadelphia, but she probably cheers for the Bears as well and the Cubs every now and again.
Yeah, it'd be tough not to. I mean, they consume the city so much. But so I always ask this question to people because I find it fascinating. What was your first job? And I don't mean necessarily your first professional job, unless that was your first job. But, the first job maybe when you're a teenager or a college student or something. So.
Yeah, so I early on, probably similar to a lot of people, mowing lawns, babysitting for sure. But given that you had mentioned athletics was a big part of our life, I spent a lot of my early years and I'll call it even teenage and college years, doing a lot of different sports and activities. So coaching, helping younger players develop, also helping coaches during camps or clinics and things like that. So that's really what I did as my first jobs.
Well, my first job was Burger King. Yours was a lot more interesting. But I actually had paper routes when I was really young. I'm not sure if young people today even know what a paper route is, but just such a different world. But for young people who may not know, I literally went house to house and physically delivered the daily newspaper, in my case, the Boston Globe. So you, I'm guessing you probably weren't much of a student in high school because you didn't really go to a good school. We used to call Stanford a safety school. No, I'm kidding. You went to Stanford, where Division I, and you played basketball.
I did. Yes. So that was part of the reason I moved so far away from home. Super close with my family, so it was a tough decision. But to your point, I wanted to get what I thought would be the best from an athletic perspective, but as well as an academic perspective. And I think Stanford really excels in both of those areas. And so that's why I made the move out west.
Yeah, it would be hard to find a school that excels in both the way Stanford does. And I'm Bostonian, right? So proud as I can be about
You have
Harvard and
some pretty good
MIT.
schools in Boston too. I
Yeah,
hear.
but nowhere near the athletic success that they had. Although the MIT men's team did something that's probably never been done, the men's basketball team. They made the Division III Final Four, and all 12 players on the team were their high school valedictorian. So,
That is an amazing fun fact. Okay.
yeah, I'll go on a limb and say not only that it's never been done, but unless that team made it the next year, it'll never be done again. So, yeah, they did get crushed in the Final Four, but still proud of them anyway. So, but
Love it.
so you studied science and technology at Stanford,
Hmm.
and it's interesting when I look at the role of the modern CFO. Probably no area better to have a high aptitude in than science and technology in particular. But did you envision yourself in the world of corporate finance with that background, or did it just kind of happen differently than you thought?
Yeah, I love that question. I know a lot of people are surprised to hear the answer. So definitely not. Finance nor the CFO role was on my radar at all growing up, and even quite frankly, throughout my undergrad years at Stanford. And so I actually went out west, thought I wanted to be a doctor. I wanted to be an orthopedic surgeon. I could stay with sort of that athletics. But I also went to school in Silicon Valley in 1998, not to date myself, but to give some context around what was happening at the time. And so I went out west. I saw all of the amazing opportunities some of my teammates and classmates were getting post graduation. And I thought, what an amazing opportunity. Things were shifting, things were changing so quickly. And I just had this like inherent interest in understanding the tech space a little bit better. And so that's when I decided, hey, you know what? I can always go back to medical school if I don't like this. But that's when I changed to more of an engineering degree. And it was such a fun degree. I was able to pick all of the classes that really just were of interest to me. And so it was a little combination of computer science, a little bit of mechanical engineering with a focus on human computer interaction. That's what I was really, really excited to learn more about. And I thought that that would also help me post graduation sort of get my foot in the door at one of these tech companies.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's interesting, but like there's a shortage of accounting students, and therefore there's a shortage of young people entering the profession. And for a number of reasons. But I always told them, look, CFO is one of the most interesting jobs a person can have. And it's not like, back in my day, and I graduated undergrad in the 1980s, where, for some reason you knew you wanted to be a CFO, you probably best off starting in public accounting and then leave and broaden that experience a little bit. But, today there are dozens of paths to becoming a CFO. And by the way, studying technology may actually prove to be the best one for you. I mean, in the modern world, it's tough to be a CFO if you don't really, to have a digital mindset.
Oh, absolutely. I think, yeah, I would say probably 20 years ago, I think the path was a little bit more linear in the sense that, yes, you maybe studied accounting or economics, you got your CPA, and it was like a very clear progression on how to get to sort of the CFO position. I think now that's changed quite a bit. I think the role of the CFO itself has evolved. And I think in some ways it's more important than ever, given some of the macro volatility and just, what's happened across the globe over the last 4 years. And so I think having different sets of experiences, being able to connect the dots in ways and draw from other experiences, even if it's not exactly related to, say, finance per se. But I do think that makes you more resilient. I think it makes you more adaptable and able to deal with some of that change that, quite frankly, no one was ready for or could really anticipate. And so I think being able to be nimble like that really helps. And I think the collective experiences really help to reinforce that, at least in my career.
Yeah. And, when I talk to CFOs, and I haven't been one for several years at this point, but, the biggest skill they have, leadership and communication maybe is number one. But number two is problem solving. At least that's what they tell me. And who's better at solving problems than an engineer? Like, really nobody, right? I mean, it's a whole profession designed about solving problems, kind of. So
Absolutely. Yep. Different mindset perspective, just being able to triage, right? And being able to go be resourceful or coming to a solution from just a different mindset, I do think has been valuable.
yeah, no, that makes sense. And so I want to talk a little about your career, not
Mhm.
all of it, but you've worked for a couple of what I at least would consider iconic companies.
Mhm.
I get 100% name recognition with our listeners. I'm going to go on a limb and say, but eBay and StubHub.
Mhm.
And so I'm curious, what are some of the lessons you learned, maybe some mentors you had along the way, and
Mhm.
just things that grew professionally? Because I believe this is your first job as the CFO. You've been country CFOs, but
Mhm.
this is your first one. So how did they prepare you to be the CFO today?
Yeah, absolutely. I'll even add another name I think people will recognize to the list. But I actually started I'll call it my eBay career at PayPal. So at one point, eBay did own PayPal and StubHub. And so part of the reason I had such a long tenure at eBay was because there was so many different opportunities. So you think about e-commerce and marketplaces, you think about fintech, and you think about all of the different industries. So it was just a great group of collective experiences. And so what I've learned the most from that, well, one, very practically speaking, I tell everyone that's where I grew up. That's where I got all of my finance training. It was effectively on the job. And it was because eBay had incredible employee development programs, especially within the finance organization, that gave me that opportunity. And so it's something I try to bring to my teams. I'm sure we'll touch on that a little bit later on. But one of the most powerful things they could do was provide me with opportunities in a way that both challenged me and stretched me, gave me opportunities I would have never had at another company, but they also provided a tremendous amount of support and guidance and mentorship. And so when I think about some of the folks that influenced me pretty significantly, I think about someone like Bob Swan, who was the CFO when I first started and who brought over a lot of the practices and a lot of those programs from GE and really, I would say, crafted those and made them, I think, more suited for tech and for eBay in particular. And then Scott Schenkel, who was also a former CFO and an actual interim CEO of eBay, was also a huge, huge mentor and sponsor of mine and who provided me a lot of these opportunities that I had in order to experience and grow and prepare me for now what is sort of the number one finance job. And along the way, there's so many other people. I'll call out one more person who is just an incredibly dear friend, but who is still the best people manager I've had today, Kim Safari. She was the first person to really instill what it meant to be a true coach and to how to build highly effective teams within the workplace. And so everything that she's taught me, I try to pass on to my teams as well.
Interesting. Because it occurred to me just now, but you've worked for two of the most famous CEOs of our lifetime, and Meg Whitman and then Elon Musk. And, I know Elon's been in the news a lot and it hasn't always been positive, but, you got to give it to the guy, right? I mean, he's maybe the smartest business person on the planet right now, so, since Steve Jobs passing, right? So that must have been, even if you didn't get to know them directly personally,
Mhm.
just being around the companies that these brilliant people created must have been something special.
Oh, to work with visionaries for sure, and someone like just a strong female leader like Meg Whitman, who maybe is not the visionary per se, but is able to take those visions and execute and get folks to scale and get companies to scale. It was all in all great experiences.
Yeah, I actually met a recruiter who he told me he knows Meg pretty well, and he tried to talk her out of taking the eBay job. She was a candidate for a different job. It's hysterical the way he tells the story because the company he wanted to go to didn't make it.
I
It's
was gonna
like,
say,
thank
I'm
God she
sure
didn't
she's
listen to
pretty happy
me.
with that decision. I think she feels good about that.
Yeah, it was probably a top 30 business decision for her, to say the least. So, but cool. So then, what a great run. Some great companies. And then you came to NerdWallet, and, it was probably about a year and a half before the company went public. And I'm guessing you were recruited into the role, and maybe what was attractive about the role was the chance to take the company public. Am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, absolutely. And again, just going back to the time I had at eBay and StubHub and PayPal, and just super grateful for the preparation, the opportunities, and being able to not only work in different business units across different industries, but also be able to have practical functional experience in the various functions within finance itself. I felt like gave me all the tools I needed to be the number one finance person at another company. And for me, I wanted to go to a company that was obviously a little bit smaller, who had the opportunities to grow and to go through some sort of liquidity or exit event, and who really needed the experience that I brought, which is really getting a company to scale and getting it from, I'll call it from the one to two, and preparing them, giving optionality so that there were choices and options we had for that liquidity event.
No, that's fantastic, and that's in fact when you spoke at the conference, you were on a panel with a
Mhm.
couple of other CFOs who'd done recent IPOs, and that's kind of the holy grail for CFOs. It's like you join this elite club when you've taken a company public. So, but no, so that's great. So you join the company, and you work for one of the co-founders, CEO Tim Chen. And to me, developing a loyal partnership between the CEO and the CFO, that's the question of advice that I get asked the most. How do I do that? Because I think there's a recognition that even CEOs now are saying their most important partner across the C-suite is the CFO. But if I can ask, a little inside baseball, what's your relationship like with Tim? And
Mhm.
how do you work on it? Or are you lucky and have one of those relationships you don't have to work on it? So,
Yeah, listen, it's great. And I admire Tim and I'm so grateful for the experience and opportunity he gave me. But the reality is it's one of the main reasons why I joined NerdWallet. Tim and I believe, balance each other out very well. He's the visionary, he has all the ideas, he loves connecting dots or seeing patterns, and I love to go execute and get things done. He took the company from 0 to 1. And as I mentioned earlier, what I brought to the table was being at a larger public company with the experience to help scale. And so we've had a very collaborative partnership during my 4 years at NerdWallet so far. And it's one of the most important things for me. And it's one of the things I appreciate the most. And so I think we provide a really nice balance for one another. We come about solving problems in a very different way. And so we have very spirited discussions on what we want to do next, why, how we're going to go get it done. And I really think it's the balance of those two approaches that actually make us really successful and make it a really good partnership.
no, that sounds great. And he is the founder too. That creates challenges and opportunities because, if you were an outside CEO and, it's not like they would only hire a thoroughly competent person for the company. But the outside CEO may not have the same level of passion as the CEO who started the company, right?
Mhm.
And so, that must be, something special to work for a company that's this successful. And yet the person who founded it in the garage or whatever it might have been is still running it as a public company. That must be great.
Oh, and you took the word right out of my mouth. I would say passion is the biggest way I would describe working with a founder. What I also appreciate and admire about Tim, though, is he is very open to feedback. And so he will listen, we will discuss, we will debate. We might not always agree on everything, but I know that he will at least open up and take time to hear my opinion and understand the why behind it. And so that's been great to work with. And I think as long as founders in general, not speaking about Tim per se, but as long as they can also adapt and move forward and be open to different ideas, especially as the companies move throughout their life cycle, I think founders can continue to be really successful leaders of companies.
Yeah, no, that makes all the sense in the world. I always ask this question of my guests, but I particularly want to ask it of you because you are such a high level athlete. And so, you're probably more competitive than the average bear, as they used to say on the Yogi Bear show. But how has your career in athletics? And, to be clear, if people don't know, I mean, Stanford was Division 1, right? High level, hyper competitive. A lot of people are paying attention to it. But how is your career as a high level athlete influence your philosophy on building a team in business? I'm sure there's some parallels.
Oh, more than parallels. It's probably the thing I'm most passionate about. And I think it's the piece that's most important to me. So obviously working for a company with a great purpose and a mission is fantastic. And obviously, as a CFO, I love to have a company that has really good financials and is profitable. But for me, what makes the day-to-day fun is the people I surround myself with. And even though we're not in person as much as we were, say, 4 or 5 years ago, we're still spending a ton of time with the people we work with, more so than even our families or anything else. So for me, super important that I really respect and I trust the people around me and that I'm building really high functioning teams. And my first experience with that was in sports and youth athletics and then progressing in my career. And that is something that I try to bring to the workplace as well. I believe high functioning teams are a lot happier. I think they're a lot more successful. You weather the tough times better and you celebrate the good times even more.
That makes sense. And, it's probably particularly important in your current role because you transform, I mean, the whole company, but, finance, it transformed from an entrepreneurial culture, which I'm sure you want to keep, but you're going public. So no matter what you do, the culture has to change a little bit. And sometimes it's that the people to run the entrepreneurial company aren't the same people to run the publicly traded company. So did that present any interesting challenges?
It did quite a bit. And the word that comes to mind is balance. And I do think you need a good mix of tenure. I think you need a mix of people that bring the entrepreneurial spirit, but you also bring the experience of running things at scale or running a public company and understanding what good looks like, understanding how to get there. I think the balance of those two really make a difference for the team, and having the right folks around the table, having diversity of experience, diversity of thought. Even in my team right now, we're spread all across the country, and even just some of the cultural things, it's just a really great dynamic. We have good conversations, but that is part of the dynamic that I think makes us really good operators. We have discussions. We don't all share the same opinion. We bring different experiences. And I think it's that debate and that sharing of information that ultimately leads to the best ideas or new ideas. And, the trust in each other and pushing forward and aligning and then taking that to our teams, I think has been one of the biggest factors, I would say, in our team's success as we transition from private to public.
No, that's great. And I remember when you spoke, and it was true, your panel, the moderator was a little frustrated with all of you because none of you would take any credit for the success. It's like I think you were, thanking your third grade teacher and that sort of thing. But team is just so important. I don't know a good CFO who doesn't have a good team supporting him.
Absolutely. I think I'll take credit for putting together a good team, but the reality is I'm not the subject matter expert in every single area. I am not the smartest in the room. But getting those folks together, that to me is where I've helped the most. But really, no one person can do this on their own. And so you have to rely on your team. So you better make sure you hire a good one and you trust them. And then at the same time, they can take your philosophy and also start building their own team so that it trickles down throughout the organization.
No, that makes sense. So I want a little about NerdWallet. Other than Super Bowl ads, the first thing I think of with your company is transparency. And as a CFO, I know you have to like that, but transparency in personal finance, right? I mean, it's got the reputation is as clean as it could realistically be. But how do you stay competitive while ensuring that the core values that the company espouses remain intact? Because sometimes that might be at odds.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And I think it's one of the things I'm most proud about working for NerdWallet, but it's also to you said, it can be challenging at times. So absolutely, we believe in transparency first and foremost. That's how Tim founded the company. And that is what we believe is the value add we provide to consumers and small businesses. They know they come to NerdWallet, they'll get all the facts, they'll get it in a very digestible way. And they know that there'll be no surprises and that we have consumers' best interest in mind. And that carries through. It's the philosophy I have with my team. And that comes to giving and receiving feedback, giving it in the moment. So there's no surprises when we have reviews, or if someone makes a mistake, my ask is raise your hand and just tell us so that we can fix it right away. Let's not make the same mistake over and over again, but everyone's going to make mistakes, myself included. And so having that trust and having that transparency, I think, allows us to overcome some of those challenges when we hit a road bump or a speed bump or anything like that. That's huge. And then it also carries into Tim's philosophy and my philosophy about how we communicate externally as well. And so being upfront about the challenges, celebrating successes, but I think that's also been really key for us in our journey as a newly minted public company, and having folks know that they can count on us for transparency.
That makes sense. And has that changed at all since you went public? I mean, if it's a core value, it kind of should have, but now you're being looked at all sorts of regulators with intimidating initials and stuff. So, did it force a change, or were you just continuing the same best practice all along?
No, I think that's the best part, is that we've been continuing that best practice. It's something that was ingrained and instilled in the company when I got there. And in some ways, it's actually become even more important. And to your question around some of the regulations and things like that, it's something that we believe is best for consumers, and we'll continue. We believe it's also in NerdWallet's best interest to continue with that transparency. And early on, Tim made the decision he calls it go slow to go fast, and really building relationships with users for the long term. And so that might mean foregoing monetization opportunities in the short term that maybe create bad user experiences. And so if you really have the user's best experience in mind, you create these really good opportunities so they come back to you again and again and again. And that's how you end up monetizing for the long term. We believe it's a just much healthier way to do business.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And I'm curious. In fact, I'm not only curious, but I'm legally required to ask the following question as a podcast host. But how do you use generative AI and these other emerging technologies, not only in finance, but across the enterprise to give your organization a competitive advantage? Because, fundamentally, it's a technology company, right? So.
Exactly. So my answer will probably be a little bit more around technology in general versus AI in particular, but we can go into more details on AI if you want. But we think about it in two big ways. One, how can we be more efficient internally? How can we get code written better, faster, get products to market? How can, say, the finance team in particular get vendors paid faster? How can we close the books even faster? How can we provide better reporting and better insights for our business so that we can help with better decisions and better customer experiences? So that's one, is the internal efficiencies. But then there's also a dynamic of leveraging technology to create the best user experiences. And how can we take a lot of different data sources that we feel are incredibly valuable, but how do you combine those in ways that you can create personalized recommendations and experiences for users at scale? So that's the two ways we think about technology. And one, just staying up to date on all the tech that's there. What's the easiest way to get some of that new tech implemented? How do you experiment quickly? How do you fail fast and then move on? And so those are all, I would say, mindset and sort of the philosophy that we leverage internally when it comes to deploying new technologies.
It makes sense. And I'm sure for you, because, obviously, especially with your educational background, you recognize the importance of investing in technology. You're in a, very competitive space, and yet you're a finance person, right? So you have to make sure that it's done in a fiscally prudent and responsible way. Juggling act, or
yeah,
it's kind of part of the job.
Yes, but I think this is the beauty of technology as well, because it does allow you to automate and scale in ways that just weren't possible 15, 20, 30 years ago. And so it's something I always talk to my finance leaders about. And we need to stay on top of these new technologies. We need to stay on top of best practice, even if it is, just better tools, better processes to help the team handle that scale. So to your point, we have to be prudent and fiscally responsible. We have to lead as the finance team by example if we're going to ask the business to do the same. And so how can we help the business grow and scale without scaling our cost or our headcount as quickly as the business is growing? And the reality is that yes, you can do things in lower cost geographies, but at some point you have to leverage tools and technology to help you do that.
Yeah, I mean, I have a friend, he's a barber, and during COVID, technology is, kind of what kept him up, and it's a barber. I mean, it's about the simplest business one could have. But he used technology because you couldn't have multiple people in the room. You used all sorts of technology, you booked the room. And then it just became a natural thing. And great guy and very smart guy, but I'd say technology maybe isn't something that he's passionate about. But there's very few businesses that can't flourish without technology in 2024.
For sure, especially as a public company when there's real reporting requirements and timelines and deadlines. And so you really need to make sure that you're getting through what I call the table stakes. So you need to record and report as quickly and as accurately as possible. But we also want to free up time for folks to do the analysis, to do the thinking, to say, hey, it's not about this report. What is the report telling us? How can we use data to inform the business on what's working really well? Or, hey, if it's not working as well, how can we pivot? How can we try something new? And so for me, it's as much about the practical reality of closing the books as a public company, but it's very much about creating space for our team to really do the thinking and what I call the value add and the fun part of the job.
So no, that's great. And I'm curious, partly because, the business is, I know what you do, but the inside of the business is a little bit mysterious to me. And also the fact that you're a non-CPA CFO,
Mhm.
you have to do the gap thing. You're a public company, and even absent that, a rules-based system has value,
Mhm.
even if it has limitations too. But what are some of the ways outside of gap that you evaluate company performance, and perhaps more importantly, communicate that to the non-CPA types who, are relying on that?
Yeah, exactly. So maybe I'll use one that's connected more to financials, and then I have a lot of thoughts on sort of other metrics. But, one step we took more recently at NerdWallet was to introduce and define a non-GAAP metric. We call it non-GAAP OI, to better align how we hold people accountable internally so that folks externally could also understand how we're driving the business so they could hold us accountable as well. And for us, it was really important to make sure that we were considering all of the cost of running this business. And so when you think about stock-based compensation, when you think about capitalizing internally developed software, sometimes that can get really confusing for managers, especially new people managers. And so what we tried to do is create a metric that incorporated what's the true cost of running this business and the true cost as defined by a headcount, right? So stock-based compensation is still a cost of doing business. It might be a non-cash cost, but it's still a cost. And so that was something that was important for us to hold managers accountable to, and then also provide that transparency like we talked about externally. So that's one way that we use non-GAAP financials to hold each other accountable and to share things externally. But quite frankly, I think that there's a lot of different metrics that really inform revenue. Revenue, in my mind, is an output metric. And so it's really about what are the upstream levers that we have to pull, and how do we leverage those to generate more revenue? And so, especially given where Tim has set the long-term vision for the company, which is to be a trusted financial ecosystem, and to really have folks engage with the platform more regularly, to get folks to connect more information so that we can do some of that personalized recommendations at scale that I mentioned. So some metrics would be things like, how many registered users do we have? How much do we get within a particular period? How much is the cumulative registered base? What type of revenue are they generating? And these are what I call the engagement metrics. I think this is really important for folks to understand where we're headed. And I also think it tends to lead to what I call healthier, stickier quality revenue that I think investors do appreciate over time.
No, that makes sense. And my first CFO job, and like a lot of people who got CFO jobs around the time I did, I got the job largely because of my controllership skills. I was a CPA, and not to be immodest, but a good one. But to an extent, I actually think it held me back. And I'm not slamming the credential at all, but we'd talk about revenue. I'd talk about GAAP revenue, and I was the only one in the room that cared about GAAP revenue. It's like, well, tell me about your company's backlog. Tell me about the bookings this quarter, how they compared to last quarter. Do some meaningful forecast and sales. But when you tell them you have a sale, but you have to recognize the revenue over a 3-year period, I'm really excited to be sharing this, and everybody's rolling their eyes at me. I just took
What,
me a while to
what are you
figure that
talking
out.
about? Yeah. What
Yeah.
does that mean?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think I care about this stuff? But yeah, and again, I'm not knocking, the profession that I grew up in, but it's important to recognize in the modern world, it has its place and probably always will, but it just has inherent limitations. And, I used to advise people, use KPIs when you're talking to non-financial people. I now tell them, even when you're talking to financial people, if they're the right KPIs, they're going to be more meaningful than anything you can share with GAAP. So
Yeah.
cool.
Absolutely, absolutely. But don't knock yourself too hard or your profession. I mean, listen, we need really good controllers and really good accountants. It's what I call the checks and balances and keeping everything in order and make sure you have the right controls in place. But to your point, I don't have that background. And so one of the things I always think about as well when I build my teams is, where do I have my blind spots, or where do I know I don't have the experience or the background and the skills, and making sure that I hire those people around me. And so my controller is typically the number one job I hire for when I come into a new place, because I know it's not my area of expertise, but it really is critical. And I do appreciate that there's people like you who love their job, because I'm not going to be a CPA.
Yeah. Yeah. Probably that ship has sailed.
Yeah.
Well, that's great. NerdWallet's been, such a success story. So, kudos to you and the team. But I want to shift gears a little bit. And, as I referred to, back when I became a CFO, it was backwards looking. In fact, the promotion, if you ever listen to this podcast, the woman who does the announcement, she says CFOs no longer report history, they make history. But the evolution or the revolution, if you prefer, is ongoing. So what do you think? How do you see the role of the CFO changing in the months and years ahead? And perhaps more importantly, how should, people early in their career prepare to take advantage of that? Because it just seems like it's growing and growing and growing.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. And I think the role of the CFO has already shifted pretty dramatically over the last 20 years. And I think it will continue to evolve. And it'll be really interesting to see how this role sort of plays out into the future. And I think there's so many, I'll call it sort of macro challenges right now, whether it's geopolitical, whether it's cultural nuances and changes, just technology itself and how quickly it's shifting and changing how we work together, whether it's the fact that we used to all be in an office together and now a lot of folks are remote or in some hybrid form. Like there's just so many changes. And I think keeping folks aligned, keeping folks prioritized on the right things and focused on the right things is all part of things that I see as my job responsibilities, and making sure things are properly communicated, as well as the blocking and tackling and the reporting that we talked about in terms of CFO. But yes, I think what I try to tell my team is every time we close the books, it's backward looking. It is the historicals, and that is important. And let's do it as quickly as we can. But it's really what is that telling us? And how do we think about moving forward? How do we think about changing how we're doing things from a business perspective? What is this telling us? And how does this better inform where we're going? And so to me, I spend the vast majority of my time thinking forward, thinking about business decisions, thinking about priorities, making sure that if we do need to pivot or shift, that I'm aligned with Tim and that the leadership team is aligned. We're cascading and communicating those messages accordingly. And then also setting up what are the right metrics for success? How are we going to measure success as we think about strategic opportunities? And so that is the reality is I spend much more of my time doing the forward thinking, the forward looking versus looking at historicals.
Yeah, I mean, in my career, they still used to call us bean counters, and I'm not even sure exactly what that means, but in defense of, like, we called marketing arts and crafts, so it wasn't like they were just picking on us. It was a good-natured fight, but bean counters no more, right? It's really about making things happen. So.
Yep.
Cool. But I one of my things I enjoy doing, just partly because I just like to get to know people a little bit, but changing the perception of financial leaders. So I often ask, do you have a fun fact or an interesting hobby, or maybe you've taken a phenomenal vacation somewhere that you'd like to share with the audience?
Sure. I think some people would love to know this fun fact, because I think when traditionally people maybe think that CFOs don't like taking risks or they're more risk averse. But I would say in my personal life, for sure, I think I'm a little bit more comfortable with risk. So I've had the wonderful opportunity to live abroad in a few different countries. I've traveled to a ton. I think I'm up to 64 now. But I also love scuba diving, and I love scuba diving in these places. And so my fun fact is I've actually been diving with great white sharks.
Oh my goodness. That's more of a scary fact than a fun fact. But I mean, that's one of those things, like, who was the first person that thought that was a good idea, right? But I mean, were you scared the first time, or?
I was excited, but gosh, in the moment, incredibly intimidating. And they are very smart animals. And so, yes, they will come at you from all angles and all sides. And so, yeah, it ended up being definitely a rush. And I was way more nervous than I thought I would be going into it.
Yeah, I can imagine, because I've heard if one comes after you, poke them in the eye. But I'm not sure if there's any truth to that, but I've heard that a number of times. Like the Three Stooges or
Not
something
sure
like
we're that quick or that fast. That'd be great. But yeah, they're pretty powerful in the water. And
Yeah, I
typically
crossed, like, I don't know, it was a sand shark or something, but it was a shark that I could pick up and throw, and yet I was terrified of the mouth looked like any other shark. I'm like, Jesus,
Yep.
this this 20-pound animal was going to eat me. So I ran. It wasn't my finest moment. So, well, that's great. That I knew you told us before that you did have an interesting fun fact. I wasn't anticipating that. And I would have been satisfied that you played basketball in college. So, but that's great. So I like to wrap things up with any advice you have, Lauren, for the next generation of CFOs, things that they should be thinking about that you think, in the category of, geez, I wish I'd thought of that when I was just starting out.
Yeah, I actually have two pieces of advice. So the first one is don't be afraid to raise your hand. We're not all going to check every single box when it comes to a new job or a new company. And if you have the passion, you have the interest, raise your hand. What's the worst that can happen? Someone can say no. But what happens if someone does say yes, right? And I always remind my team, you're never at that title, you're never at that level, you never have that job until you have that job. So even myself, I was never a public company CFO until I was one. And so it's the collective experiences that you have that give you these opportunities. And so have the courage to raise your hand when something interesting comes up. So that's the first one I give. And then the second one for me, I'll classify as prioritize, but let me explain that a little bit more. I've always valued hard work. It's something my parents taught me very early on, and then my coaches continue to reinforce. But I also felt like earlier in my career, I tried to take on everything. And we all know that trying to do everything all at once, you're not going to be great probably at any one thing. And so given where we're at today, given the amount of information and the amount of data that we have to process, given all of the different functions, say in finance in particular, you're not going to be great at any one of those. And it's okay to say that, but most importantly, prioritize, right? Create the space, know what's material, know what's the most important thing for you, whether that's in the workplace or whether that's at home. Because again, we can't do everything. We certainly can't do everything really well. And it's okay to set boundaries, and it's okay to prioritize, and it's okay to say no to things. Be clear on why you're saying no and help people maybe with a little bit of context on that. But again, you don't have to take on everything all at once. And I think that's something I tried to do, especially early in my marriage. And I felt like I was failing at everything. And so for me, one of the biggest lessons learned was prioritize, be clear and honest with yourself on what's important to you so that you can say no to the things that just aren't that important or material.
I think that's great advice. Do you know the TV show Parks and Rec?
I do.
Yeah. So Ron Swanson, one of my favorite characters, who'd have thought that a government bureaucrat would be one of my favorite TV, but he said to Leslie, don't half-ass two things, full-ass one thing. Not exactly what you're saying, but philosophically.
But philosophically, very much aligned, very much aligned.
Great. Well, Lauren, this has been a lot of fun and, more importantly, a great source of information for the listeners. So, I do want to thank you for your time. And also, I'd love to give you the opportunity for the final word.
Yeah. So thank you for having me. This has been great. I love talking about my career. I love talking about teamwork, but I'm always happy to discuss, and people can find me on LinkedIn, and I'm always happy to talk, especially about team development or what's it like being a public company CFO or what's it like in that transition. So love to talk with you again in the future about all of those things. But no, it was just great being on the show today. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode. To continue your exploration of this role that focuses on strategy, leadership, finance, and technology, listen to more episodes of the show at rockstarcfos.com. Join this revolution, episode by episode. Push yourself to achieve great things and unlock the best opportunities available to you. CFOs are creating a legacy, and it's time for you to leave your own unique imprint on the world today. That's all for now. See you on the next one.